You should accept yourself just the way you are. What does that say about who I should become? Is that just now off the table because I'm already good enough in every way? So am I done or something? Get the hell up. Get your act together. Adopt some responsibility. Put your life together. Develop a vision. Unfold all those manifold possibilities that lurk within. Be a force for good in the world, and that'll be the adventure of your life.
And, my great-grandfather was president of a university. He's buried on their campus. I mean, I came from my wife's mother, Joanna, was one of the incredible teachers in Oklahoma City. In fact, a quick story that's worth telling about that. We're having one of these exhibitions I talked about. And this woman comes up to me, and we're in Austin, Texas, and she comes up and she said, this reminds me of my 8th grade science teacher. And she said, I live in Oklahoma City. I came to see this, and it reminds me of her. And she started describing this wonderful teacher who was Socratic and who did all the things. And she said, she got finished, and I said, and her name was Joanna Anderson.
Oh.
And the lady said, how in the world could you have known that? And I said, because that's her daughter, Laura. And the woman just started crying. And she said, that lady changed my life.
Right,
so adults have an important role to play in a child's life.
Yeah.
That role shouldn't be to be an authoritarian, having order to sit at a desk where a bell rings every 45 minutes.
Yeah.
That's not the teacher's fault. That's the system, right? It's the system. Now, you're participating in the system.
Yeah.
But I always try to, I try to divide. The teachers are often the heroes, and sometimes not. The system's the problem. And I don't think there's anyone that doesn't think the system is broken.
Hello, everyone. I'm pleased today to be speaking with Jeff Sandifer, who's someone I've known for a number of years and worked together on a variety of projects. We're going to talk today about childhood education and about his background, depending on which platform you're viewing. Jeff is an entrepreneur and a Socratic teacher, which is a teacher, by the way, who tends to ask questions rather than provide answers. He began his first business at the age of 16. Then trained as an engineer, and then went on to graduate from the Harvard Business School. He has started and run many successful businesses, the most recent of which is Sandifer Capital Partners, an oil and gas investment firm with several $1 billion in assets. He's also started multiple academic programs and schools, I'm going to concentrate on that today, such as the Acton School of Business, whose students were named the most competitive MBAs in the nation by the Princeton Review. He's extended this work over the last 15 years into the K-12 realm, kindergarten through grade 12, with the Acton Academy, a cutting-edge program that blends the one-room schoolhouse, the Socratic method, and 21st century technology to aid each student in changing the world, themselves and the world.
Right. So, Jeff, we get a chance to sit down and talk today and to share that with a very large number of people. So, Jeff and I were talking before this podcast about what we wanted to talk about. And last night we thought about construing this in terms of educational reform, but really the proper way to set this conversation up is to talk about education, not so much reform, but education per se. And so let's start a little bit by talking about your background, though, and we might as well go back to, I guess, your early experiences in early adulthood, and let's lay that out, and then we can place in the educational discussion as appropriate.
Sure, and I think, as you say today, that I'm here more as a father and a husband, than an educator or even a Socratic teacher, but I really started life as an entrepreneur. Age 16, I had my first real business. We made $100,000 in profits, which, as old as I am back then, that was real money. By age 26, I'd taken $1 million investment, and within 4 years, turned it into $500 million in profits. So,
what was your first business?
Oil and gas exploration.
At 16?
At 16, we were actually painting tanks out in the hot West Texas sun. And my father had me working in the oil field as a laborer, and I didn't want to do that anymore. So I found I could hire the high school football coaches at our local high school, and instead of paying workers by the hour, I paid them by the job. They hired their football players underneath them, and their productivity was 9 times higher than the average crew. So we went out and competed, charged 2/3 what our competitors charged, and had 80% profit margins.
So why were they more efficient?
Because they were getting paid by the tank, by what they did.
So you had the incentives
And
lined
so
up
they would
properly.
show up at the break of dawn and work till dusk. The people that were being paid in those days $2.15 an hour had no incentive to work hard. So it was just purely incentive, work ethic. You can imagine football players and coaches are conscientious.
Yeah.
And so, it was a home run.
Why did they take you seriously when you were so young?
I think because if you think about coaches during the summer, they had nothing else to do. What did they have to
They
lose?
got a chance to work with their team too.
Right, and what do they have to lose, right? They're not doing anything anyway. So it was kind of one of those things where you could put together pieces of a deal to make the pie bigger for everyone.
Right.
And it just worked.
It's exciting to give people an opportunity to experience a direct return on their immediate investment. I mean, one of the things that's nice about hands-on labor, carpentry and contracting and so forth is you immediately see what you produce, and the harder you work, the more there is of it. And so obviously you built those incentives in. And so then you took that money and you further invested it. You said into something that generated $1 million. And how did that happen?
Well, I actually then went off and got an engineering degree, went to Harvard Business School. And then when I got out of Harvard Business School, I raised $1 million. And we went out and we drilled oil and gas wells in the Gulf of Mexico. And through hard work, a lot of luck, good timing, we turned that $1 million into $500 million in profits in 4 years for our investors and our employees and ourselves. And so I'm at now age 29. I've got more money than I'll ever spend. I don't spend much money. I'm a cheap guy.
Yeah.
What do I do next? And so I decided to take a year off to become a Socratic teacher and lead case discussions at the University of Texas MBA program. And that changed my life. And so for 35 years now, I've been, or going on 40 years, I've been a Socratic teacher.
Okay, so let's define that for everyone.
Sure.
So Socratic teacher and this case method.
Yes.
So let's go into what constitutes a Socratic teacher first.
So you're put in the shoes of someone facing a real life dilemma where there is no right answer. There are moral choices. You're going to have to trade off efficiency and money and what you want to do with your life. And then you've worked maybe 10 hours preparing this case, this 10 to 100-page case. Might be about Enron, might be about Acton Academy. We have a Harvard case about Acton, our school. And then it's Mr. Peterson. You're not a doctor then, you're going to be younger. Mr. Peterson, what would you do, invest or not?
Right.
And so you have to make your case. There are counter cases. And the Socratic method's interesting the way we practice it. There's only 2 questions. Would you do A or B next?
Right.
And then the second question is, what do you mean by A?
Yeah.
It's definitional. So the entire Socratic method is just helping people understand what to do next and why. And when you say what you're going to do, exactly what are you going to do?
Right. So it's the interrogation of a story. So the thing about a story that makes it unique is that it provides a deeply contextualized representation of something complex.
Yes.
And you see this happening in a court case when we're trying to decide whether someone is guilty or innocent. Really, what we do is set up a dialogue between competing narratives.
Yes.
Right. And so the defense mounts a defense narrative and the prosecution mounts a prosecution narrative. And then what you're attempting to do is weigh the narratives. And now, using the Socratic method as well, as you pointed out, you're going to be asking people questions and getting them to inquire after definitions. And then you said this is very strategically oriented, so it has to produce a binary outcome, a decision-related outcome with a strategy associated with that.
Yes.
In psychotherapeutic practice, one of the things you learn very rapidly, pretty much all therapists of any school of repute who are well-trained know this, is that you can't really give people advice about what to do. You have to ask them to delineate out the problem. You have to ask them to lay out what they might see as a solution. And you can interrogate that. And then encourage them to step through all the intermediary steps towards a solution. And I think the reason that works is that unless people walk through all of that, if they're just delivered the prepackaged solution, they actually have no idea how to implement it, but also no real motivation to implement it.
Yeah, there's no drama to it. There's no part of life. I mean, something I've learned from listening to you, about the power of story. You don't have any of that. And also, for the real world, there's no action. I mean, there are consequences. Eventually, you're going to go out and do these things yourself. And I think I was a straight A student and, a good student when I was younger, but it was all about learning to know. And so this method is more about learning to learn what are the routines and the recipes that we go through, learning to do something that requires courage, and then that leads to learning to be who you're going to become.
Yeah, well, it seems to me like it's something like an analysis, not so much of what the facts tell you the next step should be, because you never really get to that point. It's more like a delineation of the principles by which you're going to operate and an exploration of what principles you're willing to put faith in. And I would say the reason I would use the language of faith is because you have to leap into the unknown.
Absolutely.
Right? And so you want to be informed while you do that, but you don't have the data at hand, and you won't until you run the experiment.
Right.
So where were you doing the case studies?
Well, so I learned the method at the Harvard Business School, and then I took that in my own exploration of trying to figure out what to do with my own life, and at age 28 was teaching a room full of 28-year-old graduate students at the University of Texas. And so that was, and as you said, what you're doing if you do 100 cases, you're seeing pattern after pattern after pattern, much like the stories you might see in the Bible. Yeah. And you're learning through these patterns, and to have the courage to then go do it yourself, as you point out, in the face of uncertainty.
Yeah, well, you're doing something that brought up two ideas for me. One is, well, you're exposing yourself to a diverse number of cases.